Hi, everyone. Welcome to An Artist's Perspective featuring Ramiro Gomez, and good evening. I'm Cris Scorza, Senior Director of Education and Engagement for the Museum of Contemporary Art, San Diego. I used pronouns she, her, hers. As we all continue to make sense of our world, I invite you to take a minute to reflect on the events of the recent weeks, the decisions we have ahead, and the land from which you join us. I am in the territory of the Kumeyaay. Before we start this conversation, I would like to thank the many generous funders that make tonight possible, including MCASD members. If you're not yet a member of the museum, we invite you to consider the benefits, which include enlightening conversations such as this. And institutional support is provided in part by the City of San Diego Commission for Arts and Cultures. We are grateful to all of them. Before I pass the microphone to our dear guest, I would like to share a brief bio. Ramiro Gomez is a Los Angeles-based artist, addresses issues of immigration and labor in poignant ways. His cardboard cutouts and interventions on pages torn from luxury magazines with painted, faceless, brown-skinned housekeepers and child caretakers remind us of the divide that exists between affluent Angelenos and their commonly invisible domestic help. His examination of famous works of art and exploration of his everyday environment are as much a way to understand his world as they are an invitation for us to consider our context. Gomez has exhibited at the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery, LACMA, Denver Art Museum, MFA Houston, Nerman Museum of Contemporary Art, Torrance Art Museum, Cornell Fine Arts Museum, MCA San Diego, and the Museum of Latin American Art, among others. And his work is currently included in the exhibition To Tame a Wild Tongue, which you could visit at MCASD Digital. With that, I pass the microphone to a dear friend, Ramiro Gomez. And I'm going to cue our slides so that we can start our conversation.
Perfect. Thank you, Cris.
Can you all, no, wrong section. Hold on a second. Let me cue them again. I apologize for that. Yeah, there we are. So you're all seeing the slides? We're gonna get started. So here we have young Ramiro a few years back in 2012, and with one of his cardboard cutouts and at a very powerful intervention in Washington, D.C. And then a cardboard cutout sitting outside a home in Beverly Hills. So why don't you tell us a little bit about this process and how the cardboard cutouts came about?
Yeah, it's actually strange to see this picture of myself from so recent, but also so long ago. I was actually part of a cardboard cutout installation in Washington, D.C. with the National Day Labor Organizing Network, NDLON, who had contacted me at the time because I was getting a lot of attention for this project and were interested in bringing me out to uplift their own struggles with wage theft issues around day laborers and Capitol Hill legislation that was at the time trying to be passed. As an artist, I obviously have a lot of abilities to create public interventions and create public support. So, you know, there was a Washington Post reporter following me along that, again, was trying to support what they were trying to do within Capitol Hill. Again, it feels like so long ago, but I do love the fact that this project came from my own perspective as a live-in nanny at the time, working for a family in the Hollywood Hills here in Los Angeles. And then meanwhile, thinking about the Cardboard Cutout project, it wasn't the first thing I started. It actually started with this magazine painting that's now on the screen. I used to work every day in a home similar to the one that's represented in this magazine piece. And yet when I would go through the magazines, the lifestyle magazines like Lux and Architectural Digest, I never saw the people reflected. I used to work with a housekeeper named Delia, for example, when I first took the nanny job, and she would come in on Thursdays. I grew fond of her and bonded and was expecting her pretty much every Thursday where we would chat, and I almost felt like I had a coworker in the house. And I feel like she felt the same because she could talk to me in Spanish and listen to her music while she worked. And it never really felt like she had to kind of keep decorum inside there if it was just me and him. But then meanwhile, Delia one day never showed up. And I think about that moment often because, again, being in this home for working for a family, I never felt like I was fully a part of it. There's temporary, subject to dismissal at any point. And I also never felt like I was able to be a part of the landscape in the same way that the family could, you know, being comfortable enough to sit on a chair, you know, right off the bat with comforts. But the housekeepers, even more so, would never sit down. They just finished their job. But then fantasy would come in. And as I said, looking at the magazines that represented the area, I started envisioning them and putting them into the actual magazine with acrylic paint. So again, a piece like this one on the screen wouldn't necessarily be something that actually happened, but I liked the idea about a fantasy moment of the housekeeper sitting down, or in another case, like the ones on screen now, thinking sort of working and then bringing in an aesthetic component as in color, material. Magazines are, again, ripped out of a page, or the page is ripped out, and so the physical ripping is a part of my project just as much as the actual inclusion of the, in a case like this one, crayon, to kind of symbolize the dirtiness and the childish, you know, misbehaving, drawing the classic story of a kid and who needs to clean up after that. It's a document the days that I worked as a live-in nanny, I think. So I would often just make memory sketches, and oftentimes I would just really stare at the housekeepers as they worked, but then meanwhile be working as well, taking care of the kids. So it's almost like I was juggling both the son of it to explore these paintings. I remember often taking nap time break where the kids would take one to, and it was a little moment for me to go into my bedroom that I used to have there at the home and kind of just play and explore. But because of the fact that the kids were in nap time and subject to waking up, I couldn't really commit myself to like canvas or anything major. So magazines gave me a chance to just really quickly, with acrylic paint, come on to the surface of it, paint them, and then even more hide them because I didn't feel comfortable with these emotions and thoughts and expressions of the work, especially within the context of the family that I worked for or the companies themselves that I was starting to portray. I didn't want to offend. I didn't want to speak out of place. I didn't want to lose the job, but at the same time, I knew I had to say something. You balanced the play back then, Chris. I think about this like scene right here with the imaginary scenario of a woman coming in to clean a house and then take care of the kids. And meanwhile, like that child was actually in the magazine ad versus when I was including a figure, I sort of wanted someone right next to her, again, based on my own experiences in places like this. So it kind of informed where I ended up placing the figure in this case.
I think it speaks also to your understanding of the experience, that these places are never this pristine or sterile, and that there's always relationships. And I love, that's what I love about this particular one, where the nanny becomes part of the world, just making that connection to the child. And that in so many of your images, that relationship for those children is the one that they have so present. They spend a lot of time with their nannies, and in your case, they spend a lot of time with you when you were in their situation. So I think
Yeah,
this particular piece evokes that, this connection.
I definitely wanted intimacy when I remember making this piece. I wanted a figure on the ground with the child, because one of the things that the job sort of infers, but isn't explicitly given as an order when you're taking the job, is to commit yourself to loving and physically being present. There's something that happens as a nanny, for example, you almost feel like you need to go with the child and like play with them and be on the floor with them. And especially if there's like a parent around that you're working for, you almost want to give them a sense that you're committed. And so there's an expectation, and it's unspoken sometimes, of giving yourself love, which is very different from many jobs. I don't often think, for example, when I go into a bank and see the bank teller, I don't often think of the bank teller, getting on the floor with a child that's next to me in line and comforting that child. I don't think that's an expectation of certain jobs, but in the nanny case, when their full focus is a child, is someone, and protecting them and loving them and caring for them throughout the day. For a parent, being a temporary parent, means things like this: getting on the floor on your knee, drawing with a child in a room that would be, again, as pristine as this, pretty manicured, pretty expected. I mean, again, these are portrayals in magazines that are staged. And so I take that into consideration when I think about including a figure in my paintings, to kind of respond to that erasure. And that comes directly from my own experience. As you said, it's something I'm intimately aware of and been myself on the floor like that, drawing with a child. But at the same time, as a painter, I'm stepping back and trying to reflect it.
Which takes us to this part of the reflection.
Yeah. Yeah, this image is very, very important to me. I think back to that time, and that time around 2010, I had taken the job in 2009, but around 2010, these ideas of my job were really, really intense, and the feelings I had on the day-to-day were intense. Some questions that would come up that I didn't know necessarily how to deal with, because the nanny job was something I took out of necessity. I had experience with kids and whatnot, but I know what I was getting into when I said yes to the job. And meanwhile, as an artist, I had dropped out of art school and had been kind of floating at the time, trying to figure myself out. And so again, the nanny job came at a time when I needed some stability in a really nice Hollywood Hills home for a family that I knew. It just was a perfect thing. But meanwhile, day to day, I would have these questions like, why did the housekeeper come every Thursday and not be able to sit? Or why did the gardener have to stay outside? Why was major things like, why was it okay for me to be part of the family and connected, but not for the gardener and the housekeeper? And then there's other little, growing up in immigrant family, everybody kind of pitches in to take care of the day-to-day chores around the house versus when I'm a nanny, I have to clean up after the kids' mess. I have to clean up after even the family's mess. If there's something in the sink and I'm needing to cook for the kids, I need to clean those dishes and whatnot in order to get the food ready. And so there was expectations, but I didn't have an outlet, but I remember looking at an ad, and I would go through magazines at the time, painting more or less on them or drawing on them. I was almost like, at points in this time period, I was almost like exploring with the material magazine, but hadn't quite connected it to my day-to-day. But I do remember a day with this ad for a baby stroller in a pristine kitchen, which obviously is not what's represented, but this pristine kitchen really affected me because, again, they're selling a baby stroller, and I, as a nanny, was at the time working with this family, thinking how that kitchen wouldn't always be clean like they sell it in the advertisement. So I imagined the dirtiest, most darkest kitchen, for lack of a better word, but it does express a darkness, and actually underlying subject matter for me really does become about the mental tone and the rawness. I wanted to highlight through magazines like this, especially in past presentations when I've talked about it, I do want to highlight for viewers that it's not just like I started painting figures. There was a moment where, like in this case, the rawness of dirtying up the kitchen and obviously taking it to an extreme, but thinking about how the food would be on the floor after I finished lunch or dinner with the kids. The floors would be sticky, countertops would be messy. I would have to clean it up, but imagining the dirtiest of them all and then thinking about that kind of mental state that I wanted to showcase was important. And so again, this is one of the first I did with the subject matter of being a nanny in mind. And then, I showed it to my then partner, boyfriend, now husband, David, who oftentimes would be like my sort of creative soundboard, if you will. I remember showing this to him, and he responded immediately and said, "You're painting what you know. You should definitely keep following this." So it was a turning point.
I think this turns us to your ability to start then looking beyond that household and into the context of day labor. And you have a series of additional images that include other types of employment that tend to be invisible.
Can you hear me, Chris? Actually,
Yeah, I think
I'm freezing up.
Yeah, you're freezing up a little bit. So let me know if you want me to bring
Hello?
it back.
Yeah, because I think it was frozen up. I didn't catch a little bit of that. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you, but then the magazines keep jumping, and I can't really quite hear
So
the conversation.
we are on the image of Avelina.
Okay.
Of
I'm on now
And I was saying how you went from depicting kind of your world as a nanny to started recognizing some of the same type of experiences in other types of labor. So here we have a waiter ready to serve, and you started noticing more of those relationships and the relationship between.
Because you can hear me, but I keep getting just like bits and pieces of the convo. It's not, I think it's frozen.
Let me stop my sharing and see if that helps and share again.
I'm quite sure how to.
I stopped the sharing. Maybe if you
just keeps breaking up.
If you stop your video and join back in.
Hello?
We can hear you.
I hear like every other word. It's just there's a moment that you come in, and then it just sort of like doesn't give me a full context of what you're saying.
I was saying
Hello?
if you want to stop your video and then join again.
Okay, let me, I guess, leave and then join. See if that works then.
So give us a second while he tries to connect. Yesterday we tried out our run through and we were having such good connection. So apologies for what might be the 5 o'clock intense traffic of the web waves. We have you. Now you need to just turn your video.
Can you hear me again?
I can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yeah, everything's frozen. If you guys can hear me still. Okay. Yeah, mine is just kind of, the image is frozen. That's why I'm just seeing any real like image on screen. So I'm not quite sure what you guys would be then talking about. Uh,
Are you still there? Did we lose him again? Again, apologies. We'll have him connect again.
hmm.
And I'm texting him. Can you hear me, Ramiro?
I can hear you. It's just a black screen though. I'm not quite sure what's going on here. I can see you now.
Okay, so what I propose is that I'm going to share the slides. Can you let me know if you can see them, and then you can narrate them and just ask me to click next when you're ready to move on.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Again, the audio just jumps over, and then the screen is no longer the same. I'm not quite sure if it's the signal for me. I'm signal worked out. Oh, I just saw you jump over to the magazine.
Yeah. So if you can take it from here, you can just tell me when to click next.
Yeah, magazine now, but the audio's just jumping. So, well, again, I guess I'm seeing your text message now, Chris. It's a very strange thing because on my side, things are kind of not really showing. I see the magazine. So this essentially was a image that I had then taken more the energy of the previous one with the baby stroller and then put it into a almost like harnessing into the image of a figure taking away from the table and thinking about growing beyond domestic labor and into the scenes around, restaurants and gardens and hotels, not the domestic labor, but as I said, physical manual labor in general, especially dedicated to affluent lifestyles and leisurely activities such as taking yourself out for tea or coffee somewhere, and those having to maintain that lifestyles where this scene is coming from. Again, another image that I'm thinking about a lot is the reflection in the magazine series. And lately I've been thinking about just how representation and especially labor throughout the decades and centuries, especially in a case like this where the magazine was actually almost thinking about a time of gilded mirrors and the Gilded Age, if you will. So thinking of this image as like a new Gilded Age, and then people tasked with maintaining these spaces, and especially once they're actually cleaning, do they ever pause to see themselves? And I think that that's where this sort of underlying thing was coming from, is the feeling that oftentimes the workers themselves can't see themselves reflected, and if they're taking care of an affluent home, the artwork will never represent them. And if a mirror is something that they're cleaning, it's just not possible, I think, for them to sit there and think about what they're doing. They just got to do, they just got to survive. So this was, as an artist, a chance for me to kind of take a moment to imagine the reflection in front of the actual worker, and having the viewer then ponder what that would mean, especially for the context of history. Again, if you could hear me, Chris, I really can't hear anybody else's conversation, so I'm not sure if
We switch images.
Okay.
To
yeah,
Maria.
I just saw the image change, so.
Yeah, I wasn't adding anything yet.
I guess in a context of workers. Hello?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay. So again, in like the images of workers in actual labor, I think about the moment after they're done and the intimacy I've had of seeing people actually wait for the checks that they're about to get paid for their daily tasks, or myself. There's times when I've had to wait around for a check that I was going to wait for, and then there's a certain degree of not shame, but there's a certain degree of just waiting game that you have to do, and it feels strange. I don't know how to describe that, because some people have auto pay, for example, or automatic deposits for their jobs. I know for a fact in domestic labor, it's often a check that you take away from waiting for the check in the magazine series, especially. It's, again, time for people to pause and think about the person beyond the labor aspect of themselves, and more in the sense of who they are as a person beyond the job. So things like the purse, those are all details that I like to include in this series, and the title, if you will, of a domestic labor.
And I think this is one that kind of exemplifies this notion of the check and the waiting. It equates the Post-it note of the time that Maria's worked.
Okay.
With the check, and so you did a few images.
Again, I can't follow along. Yeah, I can't follow along, Cris. Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay.
So let me just tell the audience a little bit. So
on my end, I follow along to the conversation. I see the image, but I'm not necessarily knowing what the context is.
So the context is kind of in response to those images of labor waiting for payment. You did a series of magazine paintings that depicted those checks that they were waiting for, and then Post-its that either had the equation of their wages or notes of things that needed to be done. Kind of this idea of separating the laborer even further from their employer, where the relationship is not there.
Correct. And again, an image of a check in this case, and the payment on a Post-it note, if you will, the hourly rate, that was also about the underlying sort of exchanges that are very informal, very much of discomforts, if you will, because sometimes the employer is not exactly comfortable paying and, talking to the person that they're paying. I don't know. So that's where this series comes out of. And at the same time, the disposable income, the hourly rate for somebody's tasks versus oftentimes these same employers don't have any second thoughts about buying a Rolex, for example. And so like the wage versus disposable income thing comes up. What is the value of a person's labor versus the value of an object like a Rolex watch?
And now we're entering kind of more of that idea of the disposable income, and how does it relate to your practice as an artist, belonging to the contemporary art world, and the notion of the art world being part of that world of luxury in the presence of those people that we tend to erase or not see.
Correct. And then I think from what I heard you come through with that, an important thing is, again, as I move away from being a nanny and into this period of time when I started making magazine series while I was starting to work as a professional artist, that's a huge jump in one way. I don't often talk about it in detail because it's still going. I'm still barely starting essentially a career in the arts, if you will. It's not been 10 years yet since I, for example, still had my first solo show in 2014. So I'm still within the first 10 years of my career, and the jump off has been extreme in some ways, thinking about how much I've now grown and thought about these issues. And when I think about an image like the one that's on the screen, it was very important for me to throw a little humor, not just no pun intended, but with some art about jokes. It's not a joke to me, and I think that's a weird scenario to kind of artists like Richard Prince can go out there and do a joke and sell it at Gagosian. As an artist of color, I don't often get that liberty to, and so abstract in a way, or almost like a jokester, just throw out whatever thing and then have nothing to really ground my work in. And so by blending it, by taking the ad, laughing a little bit at the Richard Prince ad, for example, on my end, but then seeing something that is much more heavier for society to contemplate. I like the juxtaposition. And I do like the kind of angles that I start taking when I do think about advertisements for the art world exhibitions. Like I said, that is almost like a critique of them. It is a real critique, but at the same time, it is also a chance for me to think about the pop orientations of my work. Sometimes a joke, or sometimes a very specific image like this is easy to access and digest, especially for subject matter like what I'm painting about that is not so easy to think about. See, again, seeing the jump here, same thing, a little bit of a tongue, seeing the advertisement say, "Let's legs get tired," and then having a gorgeous, sun chair, if you will, that's just sitting there for somebody to buy in the future. I love the idea of including a figure. And in the case of this magazine, the figure is inspired by Edouard Manet's Olympia. I use the exact same pose, and I think about that painting often, which I've created in the magazine series several that reference Olympia, just because of the nature of that painting and the way that it's influenced art history. And at the same time, the ability for me as an artist to mine art history and then bring out figuration in ways that think about these subjects in different ways.
I think that's a perfect segue into our next series of work, the idea of mining our history, the idea of intervening works of art, appropriating image to share a different message. So we have here a little bit of that jump first onto the sourcing of images, and then we start with the paintings.
Yeah, these are very much important for people to get a sense of. I like to juxtapose them on my social media, for example, side by side, so people get a context of the photographs that I take that inspire sometimes either the magazine or cardboard work. And then because this specific photograph on the left-hand side was taken at a park called West Hollywood Park, which is where I worked as a nanny full-time and have really, really focused on it as almost like a creative hub for myself, a little residency that I have going there. I spent lots of time there at that park, and at the time didn't have anything specific in mind. I would just record the day-to-days of the nannies, but then coming back and creating a cardboard version of what I saw and putting it in exact same space, honor something so temporary. Like I said, a woman and a child, so many different contexts in art history. Mother and child is often a depiction for many artists, but nanny and child isn't often something that's depicted. So my way of honoring art history is this way, by thinking about the bond between these two people, and then at the same time, because it's on cardboard, because it's in public space, it's almost my way to go beyond the magazine series, which is so intimate and so personal, and no different than I do with magazine, where I'm kind of looking at the mag and then kind of figuring out where I would include the figure. I do the same thing with the cardboard and photo I take afterwards, and then share and post it itself as well, not just the painted figure.
So this is going to take us into the fuller series of cardboard cutouts, which is, as you said, really at the beginning of this talk, was something that caught attention of the national press. And we'll see a couple of them. These that kind of really come right out of the magazine series, where the nannies are at that playground that you just
Yeah,
described.
I mean, thinking of that, like, they're actually figures that I put on the playground and interact with the kids, you know, completely guerrilla style, but
And that let you,
about art.
we don't have pictures of that, but that led to a really beautiful commission at the West Hollywood Park. That's a mural, that's a permanent mural that includes representations of these nannies and the nanny pushing the stroller. That it's almost like a trampolino. So again, a rendition to art history and the methods of art history that we've seen in murals are present in the park. And here we have a gardener, but I think the interesting part is the process of creating the cutouts and then leaving the cutouts.
Yeah, I like to think about this series as sort of a physical, it's physically demanding. I have to source the cardboard. Yeah. And then, you know, it's anxiety driven. I don't often know where I'm going to set the cardboard cutouts up. I just take a drive after cutting the pieces out, and then read the sun and look at landscape. And sometimes I do go to a place where I saw an actual worker at work. And then other times I kind of just pick a location and then set up a cardboard and don't know exactly what's going to happen. So when I do set up a cardboard cutout, like this one, the first image would have been something I shared online when I first installed, versus the second one of me actually posing was when me and David, again, my partner, were talking one afternoon, a week after setting up the piece. And he asked, do you think that the cardboard cutout's still up? And I remember thinking, no way, can't be up still. It's got to be gone. And a week later, and it's still up. That's a strange little moment, but I also felt very happy. So I like to pose, and I also like to share the pose so that people can understand that, like, you know, my street art, again, it's not a vandalism. So I don't know, maybe people respect it, or maybe they saw an article of my work and realized that it was more of an art statement. But regardless, I like to think about my role as an artist and kind of pushing beyond walls and pushing beyond, you know, muralism and the history of that.
So here you contextualize the life of the gardener. So that gardener that you depicted in front of a Beverly Hills home may also be the gardener that works or has a similar story that works at UCLA. And maybe some of you recall that there was a series of stories on immigration right around this time that shared stories of workers, laborers at universities who either had themselves obtained a degree or their children had then pursued degrees at the very universities that they were working at.
Correct. The two series are interlinked. I mean, when I do them inside and outside of homes in Beverly Hills, and in the case here, inside institution like UCLA, I love the option to kind of interrupt space, public space in general. This one actually was not even technically sanctioned. The Chicano Studies Research Center invited me to set it up, but we're told it wasn't going to be safe for student body, so they kind of out of sight, out of mind. Hopefully that's not a recording, but I guess I'm saying it here on the interview, but it's just like that the level sometimes of comfort for public art and the activist qualities of it are still uncomfortable for institutions. So, you know, even if the message is so positive, it's hard to navigate that world. And I thankfully have found an option to kind of think about this artwork that goes beyond and represents the laborer's commitment to their family. And as you guys have mentioned, the the fact that there is or could be children behind each laborer who they're dedicated to, and that child, you know, number one day grow up to graduate from UCLA together, you know, both. And that's really important for me in the cardboard figures for sure, to kind of showcase as a message that transcends, again, the labor aspect and then goes right into the heart of why I do it, because I myself would not be an artist without the labor and commitment of my own parents and family members.
And here's another image of that initial collaboration and series of laborers. Here are strawberry pickers at Capitol Hill.
Yeah, to go into detail with something like this, again, I was part of the National Day Labor Organizing Network sort of campaign at the time, again, against wage theft and lots of legislation that they were trying to push, especially for were never paid for their work, labor after Hurricane Katrina, for example. So there was a lot of issues that they were trying to bring up. And then meanwhile, I had a Washington Post reporter with me following my cardboard cutout project. So when I remember setting this up on a very cold winter, you know, Washington, DC day, it was hard for me to go there and compete with the rules because there is so much high security. You know, Capitol Hill police immediately came over and they were just off camera, for example, when I set these up. And had told me they could not allow for me to anchor these into the actual grass, which is why I set them up on I think that was like a subway vent, just off camera. Again, the security guard was there. So it just shows you that there's a lot of levels to what I was doing or do with the cardboard cutout project where it's not sanctioned. And I have to kind of, you know, go with the flow and use creative things on the spot just to kind of make the image happen. And you know, the painting gets made, but how I display it and the photograph that's taken is part of the work too. And I just have to kind of navigate my way for the moment just to do what I need to do as an artist.
Powerful guerrilla work.
Thank you.
And this takes us kind of a bit back into the art world. This was at MoLAA in 2014.
Correct.
And everything from the bucket to the window cleaning tool is made out of cardboard.
Mm-hmm. It was really good to come inside a place, for example, here where I had full support of the gallery staff and the MoLAA team, and just thinking about, you know, the curator there, Eddie Hayes, and just his support at the time, bringing me into, helping me bring my work into the MoLAA collection, and the support that I felt for so many people to think about how much spaces like, again, a gallery, for example, get maintained, and my work as an artist to make that visible still kind of plays with layers at once supporting the institution, but at the same time wanting to push the institutions themselves into thinking about the employees that they have and the labor and the way that they value that.
And I think this is one of the cardboard cutouts that I really gravitate to. And I think one of the reasons why I do it's because it's so realistic. The brush strokes of the t-shirt and the folds and bends take me back to so many kind of classical paintings of garments, and the folds is a form of giving presence to the figure. Here we even see the shoes and the brand of the shoes, the kind of towel that hangs from the pocket. And I think one of the things that makes the cardboard cutouts effective is that they're invisible too, in a way. Like you may walk by and not even pay attention to the fact that there is this piece as a work of art, and you might be someone who's like, oh, the window cleaner, and it gets you caught off guard. But because the window cleaner is not part of the context that you're there for, you might just dismiss it or keep on walking without even turning your gaze towards the artwork. And it brings us to your relationships with kind of well-known works of art, and the idea of groupings and who's involved in these works. You've worked extensively with Las Meninas in various pieces. We'll see one of more recent, but if you want to tell us the idea about sort of, you start with singular pieces of cardboard and then start making compositions, very much like the paintings.
Correct. And again, it's like, I think of art history as a way for me to kind of play with material as well. Because I executed wonderful compositions and impactful paintings like Las Meninas is important for me to update as well.
And I was just paying attention a little bit to the chat so that we can start kind of inserting some of the audience conversations. And
sure.
There's a question about where does the funding for some of the cardboard here comes from, especially for those that are placed in what was probably deemed as illegal or unsanctioned environments.
Yeah. I mean, a simple question or a simple response to that is, you know, I often have the paintings or the paints, the supplies and whatnot from an art supply store, and then the cardboard is, you know, sourced from a, you know, either a store or some type of place in the neighborhood, TV boxes and whatnot. So the funding's pretty limited at the time. Again, I was working as a nanny still when I was transitioning. And many of these pieces, like, it's a hard struggle. I often wrestle with, you know, the kind of input or this, the labor I myself have to make into these paintings. But then when I put them out and kind of let them go, I realized that, you know, yeah, I could lose whatever $100 on art supplies, but it's beyond them. This is all self-funded, is what I'm saying with the cardboard cutouts. So anybody's real involvement supporting that. I thought about in the future, still considering that this work keeps developing, working with big organizations to kind of help me fund some of these things, so that it's not always something that I'm just like giving away, if you will, because that's what the Guerrilla Cardboard Project basically is. But then I think about like how much I can writing grants do, constantly have to be working, for example, as an artist in order to do something that's so so important to society in different ways.
And certainly this series has taken you far and broad into the art world. And here is a cardboard cutout of a cleaner that's like taking a break and sitting next to a broom when you were invited to the biennial in Cuenca. So maybe speak a little bit about those experiences of going from what seems to be.
Yeah, I like to think that this is not just. Sorry. Hello?
That's okay. Go ahead.
Oh, no, it's just, it jumps off and I don't necessarily know if you're speaking yet. It just kind of blocks off. But I was just saying that, yeah, Cuenca is so far removed from the quote unquote US, but being invited by Dan Cameron at the time for the biennial, and just the time it took for me to go around the city, and like, there was a very tough time for me as an artist, trying to balance between roles as an artist in the US and an artist around the globe, and especially for biennial. But I came across an image of a man that I took a photo of, and I went with cardboard to the site and then inserted it in location, which is what's going on here with Cuenca children and people around the neighborhood. And the plaza itself was actually really busy, which is not really shown in the camera shot, but there was a bus stop right behind me. So it was highly trafficked and highly public. But I like the idea of working within the plaza and then thinking of the juxtaposition between the cardboard cutout and its temporariness versus that statue right next door in permanence. Permanence and impermanence are really important at the time, especially when I was working in this biennial and just thinking about what is documented throughout history and who gets elevated as somebody that's important to history.
So here we have a unique, somewhat unique piece similar to having the real brim in the image in Cuenca. Here's an opportunity to have these cardboard cutouts where the laborers are sitting on lunch pails or ice containers, but then you also introduce the actual objects, the tapatio sauce and the coolers and the thermos there, kind of making the scene even more three-dimensional and more sort of lifelike.
Yeah, details that I needed to include so that people understand that this is based on a real experience, or I like the play between the cardboard and the real material.
And this was placed at a gallery, so this notion of also the scene of the lunch break that we tend to see outside a construction site or on the park outside somebody's day job, that then comes into the gallery as kind of the main scene, almost cueing us to art history paintings where there's that sense of the picnic as a way to reflect on community.
Correct. And again, it's something that's so commonplace. I mean, it's taken for granted, I think, that that's happening. A lot of the focus in galleries, for example, is the art on the walls, but never on the person that has to put the art on the walls. So I like the idea of having the opportunity to showcase something, especially within the gallery context, that will often be mistaken. I mean, people I remember the show, and came into this gallery space and turned the corner and saw this scene and immediately responded with surprise and like, oh wait, I thought those were real people. Like, that's weird, because I think everybody's kind of used to art being on the walls in a gallery space versus when I think about my sculptural elements and then the blending of it all. In this case, it's both paintings and sculpture and installation. I like that idea of surprise, and having people kind of think about the unexpected is a very important part of the cardboard project.
And I'm gonna move us a little bit faster. We have a few more cardboard cutouts here. This one is particularly important to you. It's one image that is part of a long journey. There was an earlier question in the chat that asked if your partner was also in the art world. And I think this is the perfect opportunity to talk both about this particular project and your relationship with another creative like David. Did you get to hear my description about Los Olvidados?
I don't know if you're seeing on screen. Audio just keeps jumping. I can't follow along.
I'm
It'll
so
say a
sorry.
couple things and then it just kind of, it's okay. I think it's my internet, but it's kind of trying to go with the flow here.
So I was one of the questions in the chat was
Mm-hmm.
about your collaborations with David, and I
Oh yeah,
think this is the perfect piece to talk about both the journey to this particular site and the story behind this work and your relationship with another creative.
correct. And I often want to highlight in some of my work, these photographs are taken by David a lot of the times, not often. Sometimes he's not around or wasn't around at the time when I was installing the cutouts. But this is definitely a case where him and I collaborated from start to finish, where I was doing the cardboard cutout project in Los Angeles, but had been really inspired by multiple things to go into the desert in Arizona and talk about the things on the border and the people. And where my work is coming from is very much about my family and my family history of migration. Um, there's a sadness with this cutout depicting the imaginary scene of a family member passing away in the desert. But then this documentation, it's part of a short documentary called Los Olvidados, the Forgotten, that's directed by David and has been immediately impactful from that creative point in 2012 to the present. The sort of guide for people into my process. It's been in multiple film festivals. It's currently streaming, I believe, on Vivo. So eventually, I'm sure the MCASD will be able to disseminate the information for viewers, members to see the actual the short documentary. But yeah, this is a very important piece for me, an installation in an area called Rio Rico, Arizona. Multiple light sites, but this is Saguaro National Forest.
And here another work that's in the collection of the museum, and one that it's very dear to my heart. It's the one that kind of, along with the initial magazine cutouts of the first few images, that started my relationship with Ramiro on our conversations. And here he is working with, in response to the original David Hockney's A Bigger Splash, that for those that haven't seen that work, shows the pool with an actual splash as if somebody had just plunged into the pool, but there's nothing else on the scene. And Ramiro eliminates that splash and integrates now the laborers. Can you tell us a little bit about your close relationship with the work of David Hockney and even your conversations with the artist?
Yeah, again, taking a nanny job was something that was necessitating David Hockney's work in art school, and just growing up, seeing art books about, especially art books that featured a bigger splash, were always kind of important to me because I would see the pop image. But I remember taking the nanny job, but then seeing a home similar to the one he depicted and just working in that home is such a different experience. I don't know if people understand that, like, art is very much a lived experience sometimes, and artists will depict what they saw. And so for my case, I didn't have to come up with a new image. David Hockney had already created such an iconic one with a bigger splash that I just remember thinking, why does this not feature the pool cleaner? Why does this not feature housekeeper? And it was something as simple as removing the splash and just calling it no splash and including the figures, which for me, when I created this image, felt very powerful, and it felt subversive, and it felt of the moment. And to paint it at scale of the original is also something very important. I took it upon myself to create it after I had originally done a first version on a smaller scale. This second one was for my first solo show with Charlie James Gallery in Los Angeles, and Charlie had already seen my original first attempt at this snow splash composition, and then had said, let's build a show around it. And so subsequently, this is the first one, and I created it again to scale with taping, changing up certain colors, but in the end, splash was going to be featured because for me, the focus should be on the temporary moment of the workers. Now, David, obviously, as iconic as he is, he has been working in Los Angeles for a long time, and then eventually had come across my work through a mutual friend, Lawrence Weschler, and Lawrence Weschler has written about my work to Lawrence Weschler. Him and David Hockney had connected about it, and that's a crazy period because, again, the series itself was never made. David, it was made because of these issues and this body of work that he created that encapsulates the California landscape was important for me to kind of wrestle with and dialogue. So the intention was never to meet him, but yes, I have now been able to connect and be in presence with him and his studio and see his reaction that's been overwhelmingly supportive because, again, you know, I'm lucky to be able to connect to such an art world giant in person, in life. Whereas David, who has routinely connected with famous artists' work, I don't think had ever gotten the case or the chance. Again, I think there was an interview with him where he never got to actually meet, or Matisse, obviously, which are artists that he constantly will depict or it inspires work that he's done. So I'm very lucky that I can connect to, again, someone like David Hockney, but then have my images be their own thing and not do karaoke.
So I'm going to move on from this pieces a bit faster considering the time. But I think you all will see how close they are to Hockney's work, yet they have their own quality. Here being two panels that are depicted, these close-ups to the scenes that exist in the Hockney works. And this, we have one image of this type of work. Soon after the Hockney paintings and a little bit of your own conversations with other artists came a series that I thought was quite interesting because you were kind of bringing your process of the cardboard cutouts and your paintings to a new medium, and this was a bit more of a play where these are light boxes that emerge from digital drawings.
Yeah, I mean, no different than David Hockney. iPads now and other mediums. He's always trying new things. I definitely thought about the influence, and then thinking about Matisse and thinking about color and thinking about also just my constant travel now. At that time, I was traveling a lot right after the Hockney series, traveling constantly with either personal or professional trips, and not being able to sketch sometimes was hard. So I remember having my phone and being able to think about an idea quickly with my phone was, in the case here, an option. And then I'm glad we were able to run a series that creates light boxes and just different in my practice.
And we're now closing towards the end, but we transition from cardboard, which has been your primary medium in so many cases, and here we have piece that clearly speaks to your work on canvas. Like the Hockney pieces are on canvas too, but that's not a medium you used often. And I think in this one, you're bringing the quality that you were working on in the Hockney series and then bringing back the sort of space quality almost of the magazines and the figuration very much in relationship to the cardboard cutouts. I feel like combines the three series almost perfectly.
Yeah. Again, my day to day and just being in museums like the Los Angeles County Museum of Art and just seeing the workers there is just a thing that I wanted to depict. But also, like, as you said, there's various series that I have. Sometimes I'm able to combine them all into one image, and that's a perfect example that happened here.
And you started making these larger scale canvas pieces. And then smaller compositions. This wall has been part of your everyday. It's both in your paintings and in your social media and photographs and close-ups. So tell us a little bit about this, because it's a really unique relationship with the area of this area of Los Angeles and the laborers that sometimes appear in the images and many times don't.
Yeah, I live not far in West Hollywood from the Paul Smith store. As I said, in times that I'm like really just sort of on my own, walking around my neighborhood, taking pictures. In times, I kind of envision an idea, or other times it's right off the bat. And I remember, the pink wall at the Paul Smith store, so iconic for selfies and just so popular on Instagram and other social media. That I remember thinking for my show on Melrose at Charlie James in 2016, where I was focusing on all these stores on the Melrose Avenue Boulevard stretch from Los Angeles, especially the West Hollywood stretch of Melrose that's so iconic. Just thinking about how much people take pictures at this pink wall, but never really understood the process of maintaining that pink wall. So in a way, I remember being inspired by Instagram, like grid-like picture imagery, and creating a piece called Paul Smith 9 Views that kind of expanded beyond an I had made called Paul Smith Store, which was a singular painting. So in Paul Smith 9 Views, it was both my attempt to think about a building throughout the day, from day to night, as this includes the first one is more of a day scene versus the final one is more of a night scene. And then meanwhile, the only figure or the only painting in this 9 grid series that acts as a figure is the one in the center. And that's based on a photograph I took of the actual person that is painting that pink wall. I love the fact that I can kind of keep growing, and a building like Paul Smith is so important to me. I keep returning to it over and over because I think of its she is so important to my work that I want to keep thinking about these ideas in different ways to kind of engage, reintroduce it, if you will, to certain people that may or not be familiar with other art of mine, but also just because it's so bright and pink. Sometimes it's like a pop song. It's the perfect sort of welcome into my work. And then maybe somebody will go further inspirations and subject matter.
And here's the first one, the initial one.
Correct.
And somebody asked about dimensions. I apologize for not including those on the slideshow. I know how important they are for us to understand scale. But if I recall correctly, these are smaller paintings that are about 10 by 8. Is that correct for the Paul Smith?
Paul Smith 9 views are about 12-inch by 12-inch each small canvas versus the actual Paul Smith that you showed second. Paul Smith is 6 foot by 6 foot. So, you know, some images are much bigger than others. Paul Smith Los Angeles is about 6 feet by 6 feet.
And is this the case for this one too?
We kind of cut out. I think I heard you. Is this the Broad? And if that's the question, then yes, this is the Broad.
It is the Broad, but is it the same scale as the Paul Smith?
It is the same scale as the Paul Smith. See, I couldn't catch that part. Yeah, it's 6 foot by 6 foot, and it's currently in the Blanton Museum of Art's collection, and will be featured there in an upcoming show.
And this is Paramount, and it's a very large scale painting.
Oh yeah, this one you don't get a sense of the scale. This is 12 feet by 12 feet, or 12 feet by 6 feet. So I think so. Yeah, it's a very large painting. 6 by 12 is the scale of this size.
And there's one soccer as part of your life too. And so frequently there'll be some homage to the game in one or two of your works. So here we have our cleaning crew just watching the game. But it leads us to kind of this relationship between your work and witnessing what's happening in the everyday. This is a collaboration with Rafa Esparza for the Whitney Biennial, and your contribution here is paying homage to those working at the Whitney Museum.
Correct, and at the time, 2017 was already under the new administration, and Rafa Esparza, an amazing friend and collaborator, had invited me to participate in his Whitney Biennial exhibition that year, but also had given me the liberty. He did not put the pressure. I remember going into this project where he said, you don't have to make anything. I just admire what you're doing with cardboard. Come and help activate this space that we're creating out of adobe. And I remember having such a good experience in the city, just, yes, being an artist, but at the same time, just being a fly on the wall and poking around the museum. The Whitney, the Whitney Biennial is such an iconic show, but not being an actual artist invited by the Whitney Biennial curators, if you will, gave me a little liberty. So it was nice to just kind of move around the museum and not be really perceived as the artist. I kind of blended in as an art handler, if you will, sometimes, and kind of just hung out with Rafa and everybody and just had my phone on me all the time, but took photos constantly around the museum and liked to record the people that I was seeing working, because then eventually my goal was to create these homages to them on cardboard and give them directly to them. That was a growth beyond the cardboard project. The cutouts, for example, in Los Angeles that I was doing are so big and about the space and almost about display. And when I think about that period, I actually liked that my work wasn't going to be displayed, for example, for the gaze or the white gaze, if you will, because again, the Whitney Biennial is such a important museum show. I wanted people that are actually depicted in my markings. It's definitely not possible in a showcase like the museum shows. So this was my way of just giving them paintings and making them, feel seen, but also for me as an artist, thinking about who owns these works matters. And I wanted them to be a part of ownership of works, especially if they're being portrayed.
And we have a few more minutes, and people are wondering a little bit of what's next. I'm going to go through the next few slides, kind of jump us all the way to 2020, and maybe telling us a little bit about what you've experienced during this shelter-in-place period And I think the two images that we're going to talk about towards the end really allow you to connect those ideas of the current moment. So let me just move on.
Okay.
We have here some other pieces that are related to your New York experience. This is restoration artwork. I want to point out to the audience that this is a piece, if you can see the very corner, there is a mirror, and that is a self-portrait, and that is an actual homage to Velázquez Las Meninas. So here we have this lobby, somewhat like a reminder of a hotel lobby or a conversation inside a home, and the artist is present, witnessing this relationship. And when you were in New York, you did a series of paintings for your show there that bring the nanny experience to context in the context of Madison Square Park. But they're similar in tone to our earlier pieces. And here's kind of your ability to capture the moment, the daily of a vibrant city such as New York and the movement. And it quickly, the single figure, I think, bring us back to your time now, to your time after March 13, when we all had to shelter in place, and when we were a few months in, reeled with the murder of George Floyd. So I'm going to share these last two images and pass the mic to you.
Okay. Again, such a strong, you know, moment for me to kind of go out and put a cardboard cutout in Beverly Hills on a day of massive protests in Los Angeles following the death of George Floyd. There's a strong statement only because I remember how not too far from that location on Sunset Boulevard on Fairfax at Pan Pacific Park, there was a massive protest that came up against police and police brutality, of course, shook everything around the city. And so again, when I was setting these cardboard cutouts up, it's so strange how different it is up in Beverly Hills, up in Sunset Boulevard, where it was calm enough for me to set up the cardboard cutout. And at the same time, not too far down, having such civil unrest and massive protests, again, instigated by the police. And I want to speak now that this moment obviously continues. There's still issues around, you know, the most recent one in Kenosha, just police brutality, the sports and the athletes taking the stand and saying no to these issues continuing. And as an artist, I need to keep doing that. This is not a sanctioned piece. This is by no means something that I have ease speaking about, but as an artist, I need to keep showcasing imagery that intersects and creates intersectionality between my issues, because no different than under COVID and within these police brutality cases, there's Black and brown people that are forced to work, forced to give their bodies, and actually killed. And in one case, directly killed by police, in another case, slowly killed by capitalism, that I need to keep pushing and think about how much these works that are at once simple, also of the moment. It's very raw for me, but I need to state, again, Black Lives Matter and things like my issues and the focus on the labor issues are going to be constant in my work, no matter what's going on in society, because I think also beyond the immediate, I need to just focus on the value of people beyond their labor.
It takes us to our last piece, a more contemplative work. And I'm going to let you take the space.
Yeah, it's good to end here because I've been going through a lot in quarantine, where, as you see or have probably seen me in the video chat with my red lipstick and my red hair, I've been expressing myself and learning to express myself a lot more as a person. Again, I've gone through so much in my life that for years never allowed me to really fully feel comfortable, and I still am not fully comfortable as I am. So I need to keep growing as a person. But then meanwhile, the pressures on me to create, as I did the cardboard cutout and responding to issues happening in society, it can be a lot. And last year, within the context of my show at Charlie James Gallery called Here for a Moment, again, the responsibility was there on me, and I felt so pressured. It was so hard for me to come up with imagery and keep pushing my work into, again, a gallery space where things were happening elsewhere. And again, it's like a constant tension between object making and just wanting to be a person. I remember taking a break and going to a Japanese garden with a friend on a random day and coming across a man wading in the pool pond. And it was such a relaxing moment, a contemplative moment, a moment for me to just be me and see this image come immediately to me of a man cleaning, like I said, just gave me peace. And so in quarantine, because I haven't been able to make large scale work, I remember sitting one afternoon and thinking about an image to make. And so I thought back to that day last October where I remember feeling such peace, and off a cardboard that was cardboard stretched to look like canvas, that's 12 by 12 inch, and put it on my lap. And I just painted through the night. And by the end, letting each brushstroke grow and build, creating an impressionist version of that afternoon and the scene that I came across, is definitely the direction I'm going, where I'm trying to think about these heavy issues, but also give pause and respite and moral support to those of us that are going through everything that we're going through right now.
Ramiro, thank you so much for your openness, for walking this journey with us, for taking us back to about almost 10 years of a career that keeps on giving, and that has seen you grown. And as you said, I think you're at this intersection, both on a personal level and with your work, an intersection that I already see moving beyond. We have a few more questions, I believe, or some thank yous from the audience. So again, thank you for your generosity. As always, is a pleasure having a conversation with you. And for those that were curious, did we spoke to each other prior to this conversation? We prepared, but we never told each other that we were both going to be wearing red, our color of power and moral support. And so here we are, the two of us championing each other in our red shirts. My red lipstick has faded, but then on we go, and we keep on thinking. So thank you all. Keep on being part of our digital programming. There's a lot coming up. We have my colleague Alana Hernandez is launching a new series of presenting films from our collection, arts, works on video, and you'll be able to catch those this Friday. And you'll see them frequently. Many of them are pieces that also will respond or are in conversation with her current exhibition, To Tame a Wild Tongue, and continue to follow Charless. Those are on the third Thursday of the month through November at 11 a.m. And check our website for all our upcoming public programs. Many artists this fall. So thank you, and thank you, Ramiro. We'll keep on looking at the good work you're doing.
Thank you, Cris.
And
thank you, everyone.
More thank yous, more accolades. One of our members says that they love the Arizona scene, such beautiful lighting and glow. Another person says, thank you, Ramiro. So feel the love from here to everyone, this distance learning. We all want to cherish how much we have in common. So I invite you guys to continue looking at art and be inspired. Goodbye.
All right. Bye, Chris.